Edge of Atropos. Returnal Review.
Hello, my name is Naoto, and I'm your local Monitorhead internet reviewer, and Returnal is finally here, the first major PS5 exclusive to come out after launch. You were supposed to come out at launch. Returnal is the first major single-player PS5 exclusive, and I was eager to jump into a roguelike and lose myself. Let's get into it. Returnal is a roguelike and is designed to be a challenging one at that. Typically with this genre, the biggest challenge developers will face is making the gameplay fun enough that the tedious nature won't stale the gameplay. In this regard, they've done an excellent job. After a couple hours in the first area, I saw every room variation, but the game's bullet hell style gameplay has been blended perfectly with the third-person shooter combat. My initial run of the game also doubled as my first hour. I won't lie, I got a bit cocky and then... Death is part of the gameplay, and runs can last upwards of an hour or more down to just 10 minutes. Whilst I haven't learned the names of all the enemies because, well, look at these names. I did quickly learn what their attacks are and which ones I had to run away from. One of the first comparisons I can make is during difficult rooms, the gameplay felt a bit like Doom, constantly having to run around and keep your distance from certain enemies. There are special rooms that I refer to as challenge rooms, that lock you in with huge groups of basic enemies with one or two more difficult ones. And my god, this gameplay is exhilarating and super tense, which also kind of ties into the horror elements. Surprisingly, despite Selena being well equipped and finding a shit ton of items, I still felt similarly running away from bigger baddies like I did in RE7 and genuinely felt terrified of some of these creatures chasing me.
Okay, save it for the next review.
The HUD and 3D map design is put together so that cycling through the menus is not necessary, and a simple press of the R3 button will actually highlight doors so that you are always on the move and in action and not constantly having to flip through menus. Being a PS5 exclusive means that they have all the reason to focus on the DualSense. This is the most consistent good use of the adaptive triggers and haptic feedback that I've seen since Spider-Man. While difficult at first, pressing the left trigger halfway down acts as your focus aim, while pushing it all the way acts as alt fire. It was hard at first, as it felt like the controller wasn't supported comfortably in my hand, but after some time I got a lot more familiar with it. Regardless, aiming from the hip works well, and you can take your time getting used to it. What is essentially a additional trigger button. Not only that, but haptic feedback is used excellently. When entering certain areas, you'll feel the beats of rain which slowly fade away, even if you're still in the area. This is the perfect way of implementing this without rendering the battery in your DualSense useless. The card feature is great for tracking progress, but the resume activity button is rendered useless due to this being a roguelike. The game also reminds me of Metroid, with the permanent progression in the game feeling like you're building up Selene's arsenal a lot like Samus. Lastly, for gameplay, the end of level bosses, or at least Krlic, because he's the only one I've reached so far, pretty much have all the abilities that the enemies on that level have, meaning that playing each run will get you more familiar with attacks that bosses throw at you later on. The gameplay's f***ing good. The game's opening cinematic shows off the graphics, and of course it looks great, but the environments are where it really shines. You'll see a variety of locations from alien forests to wasteland deserts that just look at these vines. And this level of design continues into the humanoid and animal designs of the enemies. Straight up, some of these visuals look like they come straight off this front cover of an old 60s sci-fi novel or early PC games like I Have No Mouth But I Must Scream. Sound design is stellar, and you'll quickly associate sounds like the satisfying sound of picking up obolites or the feeling of dread when hearing the sound of larger enemies spawning. The game's soundtrack is heavy on synths and suits it perfectly, going for that alien vibe. The presentation is excellent and does what it set out to do perfectly. Like the game's progression, story is something you'll have to earn throughout. You'll learn little facts here and there of the game's audio logs that are littered throughout the whole game, but the highlight of the story definitely has to do with the 20th century house that you'll find during your run. Bringing the game to a first-person perspective, you go through this house as you progress, and this is where the game gets a bit more eerie. Reminiscent of PT, this is where you'll learn more about Celine and why she's after White Shadow, and more context for her whole world without giving away too much or being too obvious. The game's story is very cryptic, and it'll be the main reason that you keep pushing through, entering these new areas and having to face new challenges and enemies. As for Celine herself, she's a pretty interesting character. Her character is a mix of the curious scientist trope and the classic determined main character typical of the action games genre. Of course, with White Shadow, the deeper mysteries of her character will be revealed later on as you progress. Returnal is what the PS5 needed. After being on the market for this long, at launch you had Demon's Souls, the PS5 exclusive that probably sold many on the console. While Returnal does suffer a bit like Demon's Souls, having a focus on more challenging difficulty that may scare off most, with console exclusivity aside, what are my final thoughts? My only real complaint is the lack of an ability to save a run. If you close the game or, like me, have a crash, then all that progress on that run is gone. I would say that having a run lost to a crash is more of a concern for me than just saving mid-run. Everything else has been put together and gone through with a straight razor. After getting past the learning curves and the unique use of triggers, you have the perfect action roguelike that will challenge you and keep you busy for hours on end. Every part of the gameplay and presentation is on point. I give Returnal a 9.8 out of 10. Feels like it's been a while since anything has really been going on for PS5, but with RE8 coming soon, and with Ratchet & Clank on the horizon, there's a lot to do, and there's a lot I still want to try out, like Nier Replicant and Pokemon Snap on the other systems. The year is beginning to heat up, and I'll see you guys next time in Castle Dimitrescu.